We are always riding the wave of life. Every wave goes up. Every wave crashes down. And at the bottom of every wave, it's already beginning to rise again. But when you're in the bottom of a wave, the last thing you do is anything. You go and find a safe place and you hold and let the wave roll, knowing it's never going to last forever and you're going to have another opportunity to rise again and surf the next wave and get to safety and then go down and hold if it's difficult. The more difficult it is, the harder it is, the more important it is that you just hold and do nothing. You do not act. Because whatever you do then will be a desperate, over-the-top reaction to how it is. Just hold and stay safe.
In this episode, it's a privilege to be having a soulful conversation with a psychotherapist, motivational speaker, high school EQ coach, author, and mother who is a survivor of her eldest son's suicide. Welcome to the show, Sally. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm very, very happy to be here, and it's an honor. Thank you so much, Toby.
Thank you so much. As I said earlier, it's a privilege to have you here. And before we started recording, I was saying, it's a very heavy topic we're going to be talking about right now. It's a very, heavy, I would say, because, it has to do with, loss, and not just any loss, but loss of your eldest son. And that's why I really admire your strength and, you've been able to do the work to process it all. And now using that story, that experience, even to help people out there. That's a wonderful thing to do. That's a wonderful mission to embark upon. Yeah. So to kick off this soulful conversation, I would just love you to share the story of your journey.
Yes, I was just a mom. I just barely had passed high school, and I got married to a guy who was also very marginal, and we had this little baby 5 years later. And all I really wanted were happy, dumb kids, because that's all I thought I could possibly handle with my background. And unfortunately, that was not what I got. My firstborn was reading at 2. He was giving me really great 45-minute debates at 7 years old on why he didn't need to make his bed and was winning, which forced me to go back to school because I knew it would only get worse and I had to somehow keep up with this guy. And so I couldn't get a B because he never got a B. I got one B and he crucified me for it. At 14, he was teaching calculus. At 16, he was invited into Carnegie Mellon in an accelerated program in theoretical math, along with 32 other brilliant young people. And 4 years later, he was the sole survivor of the program. It was so tough that he was the only one who made it. And he walked out with both his bachelor's and master's in theoretical math at 20 years old. And, he was just a rocket ship. You couldn't stop this boy. He was just on a roll. He did nothing wrong but to do too well. And all I saw was this young genius, and I was just mesmerized and thrilled and trying to support him. And I was missing stuff that was happening all along because I was dazzled, I think. And I didn't know any better either. Like most moms, you're just trying to support your children and lead to the positive. But I was missing a whole lot to find out the hardest way possible. And so he graduated with his, at 20 with 2 degrees awarded simultaneously. And he got into corporations. And a year and a half later, I thought he was doing wonderfully. He was telling me he loved his boss. He loved what he was doing. And I get the call, you can't survive. You don't survive. And that was my death, really, as a mom. I died because there was no way to survive that. But I was just getting licensed. I was halfway through my licensure as a psychotherapist. And I had the tools now I'd never had as a mom. And I had to find out what happened to my son. I had to find out his story of what brought him there. And that became a mission. And it took me 28 years to find the stories that I either didn't understand or never knew, and turn them into a book.
Yeah.
And the book had to actually work. It couldn't just be a book. It had to actually do what I wish I could have done for him, which was save other people from these kinds of tragedies.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm so sorry for, everything that you had to experience. I can't imagine, or comprehend the gravity of how much you must have felt, or how much pain you will have felt at that moment when you got that news at that point. So how were you able to then process the grief, after hearing that? Can you walk me through that process of, getting that very heartbreaking news to becoming who you are today, right?
Well, at first I was demolished. I was inert. I wanted to kill myself. I really did. I felt like a failure, like I had completely destroyed my son's life. And I didn't know what had really happened, but I knew that I had blown it. And yet I couldn't kill myself because I had my other son who was here. He was younger than my brother, and I couldn't do that to him. So I had to stay alive. And as I was halfway through my licensure, and my licensure was stuck because I couldn't move on. I couldn't finish it. I couldn't take the last test because I was too grief stricken. And so, but I tried working, and I was fired from my work, and I thought, this is the end. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I realized that if I was going to survive, I had to redo my whole life. I was getting precancerous conditions and all kinds of things that suggested that my body was toxic and it was killing itself too. So I had to heal my body. I had to heal my home because this home was full of my son's memories, and all the memories that I used to just love and enjoy had turned to a mausoleum of pain and anguish because of his death. I had to completely change out every wall, every floor, every view I had from every window had to change, and I had to do the work myself because it had to be in my own two hands that would have to renew my son's memories in a celebration of his life and not a mausoleum holding his death.
Mm-hmm.
And as I learned how to tile, I became an incredibly good tile setter. And so I tiled every floor, I tiled every counter, I tiled every bathroom, I tiled the outside, the walkways and the patios. I did it all myself. And I basically was renewing this house as a celebration of him instead of the mausoleum that I had been living in before. And as I did that, my body began to get stronger, and I began to feel better. It's never better, but it's always just a process. But you never get over it. It's never gone very far from you. And I've never been able to say goodbye to him. I can't. I go visit his grave at least twice a year, and I always have something I have to share with him and something I need to ask him, and I do rituals. And the cemetery doesn't know that there's 2 pets that he loved are buried with him. The cemetery doesn't know that. And every time I pass the sign on this going into the cemetery saying no pets allowed, I laugh. There are 2 pets that are.
Yeah.
So I have been through a lot, and yet at the same time, I've learned things I would never have learned any other way, and he still teaches me every day. I'm continually open to what comes through, and he's really, even I've had psychics tell me, this was right after he died, actually. I got a cold call from a woman in a city in Arizona called Sedona, Arizona, and it's a very spiritual place. And I've been there before, but I didn't know this woman. I'd never met her. And she called me cold, and she said, I know about your son. She said, I'm a psychic. And she said, I have something very important you need to know, but I will not tell you over the phone. You'll have to come to Sedona. I'll give you a free reading at my house, but you have to come. I have to do this in person. It cannot possibly be over the phone. And I just was like, I'll do anything. But I couldn't drive, so my boyfriend drove me down, and she met me at her home, outside her home, and she walked me in. My boyfriend left and said, I'll be back in an hour. And she sat me down in her living room, and she had these giant crystals about 2 to 3 feet high, north, south, east, and west, and we sat in the middle, and her son, who was mildly retarded, gave us, served us tea, and she started talking. I don't remember it all, but what I do remember her saying is, your son came and did what he needed to do and left. But she said, you and he share the same reason for being on earth. He finished his part, you'll finish the rest. And I had no idea what she was talking about. But it was a stunning set of statements that just were very powerful for me, but I didn't know what in the world could she possibly be talking about. Well, now I know.
Yeah. And what is that? What was she talking about?
Oh, there's a lot that is going on with our youth today that's destroying them from the inside out. And they can't verbalize it because they don't have the words for it. And parents can't see it because it's inside of them. It's a growth process. It's what's going on. There's a seed at every developmental age that we work on that helps us grow to the next stage and the next and the next. And if you don't know what it is, you'll miss it, or you'll have just partial success or whatever. But if you miss it, enough, it falls into the negative and it starts to follow people out. And
Yeah.
so that was one thing that came through. And that's what I based my whole book on, is teaching people the different things that children need to feel at every age, because it's different for every age. It's
Yeah.
a growth process. It's like the seed in the oyster. It's like the irritant in the oyster. There's a little seed that got in there and they have to lap it and lap it and lap it to make it feel better. And it grows this beautiful pearl. Well, there's a pearl inside of us, and that irritant happens at every age, and it's growing that pearl larger and larger, and us in it as well become more resilient and empowered and strong and all that. But if it falls into the negative, it does hollow you out, and then you see a collapse like John experienced.
Yeah. And how do you advise parents out there? Like, how can parents learn and know what matters at each stage of childhood development? And, what can they do to ensure that their children stay alive and stay well and keep on thriving?
Well, read my book. I'm
Yeah.
not kidding, because that I spell it out, and there's a story and this is not a hard book to read. It's very readable because my son's story is a very interesting story in itself. He wasn't an average kid, and what happened never was average. But at each stage, something happened for him that I didn't recognize going on. I didn't know, I couldn't tell that this would have any effect on him, but it did, but so he kept growing, and as he was going straight up, he was slowly but surely hollowing out. And I didn't see it. I saw the rocket ship. I didn't see the inside of the jet fuel becoming empty,
Yeah.
so that he lost all that momentum. And what happened is the story, but so what I do is each chapter, I start with a story of what happened to him at that age. And it's a cautionary tale. And then after I tell the story, I describe what the key issues are and how that toggle works to make sure that people know what it is that you have to really support and reinforce, and what you want to make sure you avoid. Because it's a toggle.
Yeah.
And so at each stage, there's a different toggle, and it goes up there's 8 different ones. And those were identified earlier by this absolutely brilliant psychiatrist named Dr. Erik Erikson, but nobody ever learned about it. Nobody's ever taught it. Most people never hear of it. But he did this work, and he's right. And if you lead to that, you will have a strong, resilient, empowered person growing and becoming, and there's going to be no fall. But if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know what those issues are at every age, you can completely miss it, and innocently, as I did, and not realize the damage that was going to.
Yeah.
So it's a simple thing, but you need to know what it is. And it's easy to read, it's easy to understand. But once you know it, then you have a tool. You have a tool to use throughout life. And that works for your young people. It works for parents. It works for people, kids at risk or in trouble. It works for grandparents. It works for educators or therapists or anyone. If you know what it is, you have power. If you don't, you are at the mercy of random chance.
Yeah. Sally, is it possible for you to share one of these stories with us and tell us the things that you missed out on?
Oh, let's see. There's so many. Yeah. Well, the first stage of life, you come out of the womb, and the first issue in life is, can I trust my caretakers? Can I trust those caring for me? Are they good? Do they hear my cries? Do they come and help me? Do they make me feel better? Do they feed me? Do they make sure that make me feel welcome and happy to be here? Am I safe? This is the very first question out of the womb for each and every one of us, no matter what culture, no matter where. This is the first issue. And it's about trusting life. Can I trust life? Can I trust the people? And then behind that is, can I trust life itself? And behind that is, can I trust myself? So trust is the first issue. And when he was born, I was a new mom. I'd never had a child before. I'd never really cared for a child. And he was crying all the time. And I called the doctors and the doctor I had, and he said he was an old man. And I thought he was probably really wise and very, uh, had all this wherewithal. And he said, oh, it's colic. It's colic. Colic is a stomach upset. And he said, a lot of kids, a lot of babies have it. It's just something you have to live through. It takes about 3 months and it's over. And I was like, gosh, this poor little baby was suffering and suffering. And I'd pick him up and he'd cry more, and put him down, he'd cry. And it was just absolutely agony for him and for me. And my husband was very alienated by it. He just said, oh, that kid is your problem. And he just basically took off. But anyway, for 3 months, we suffered horrifically with this. And at the end of 3 months, he was still crying really hard. And I called the doctor. And again, I said, he's still crying and you said it'd be gone, but in 3 months. And he said, well, maybe it's the 4-month colic or the 5-month colic. And I just hung up on him. I was so mad. I was like, I can't believe, that I don't trust you anymore. And so I called around to my friends, and they referred me to somebody they thought was pretty good. And I called him, and he said, bring him right in. And so I brought my son in. I will never forget this as long as I live. And I laid him out, and the doctor had taken his clothes down, and he was checking his body, and he was feeling along his collarbone. He was feeling that. And he said, oh, look. And he said, put your finger right here. He says, feel that lump? He's got a broken collarbone. He said, it's the first bone that will break during a birth so that you can be born at all. My first doctor had never noticed it. And so that was why he was crying. He had a broken collarbone that I couldn't tell because he was just a little tiny infant, but that was where the pain was coming from. And of course, that meant every time I picked him up, I hurt him. And every time he moved, and then his bassinet, it hurt. And so he was crying for that reason. It wasn't anything to do with his stomach. And so for 3 months, he and I had a terrible beginning, and he couldn't trust after that. If anyone came near him, his body would just pull back and he'd flinch. He wouldn't let you touch him. And so that was a horrible beginning. And now I know that the research shows that if babies are born in a situation where they come to the point where they realize they can't trust, they're a high suicide risk later on in life. So that alone was just one thing that happened. But, he healed. He was already healing, but he still had now he had a lump there, but he had a miserable beginning, and I was the only person he saw. And so I was associated with all that pain. So he didn't want to be picked up by me or anything. He wanted just to be left, he'd back away. And so that was a horrible beginning. But there were so many more stories that happened to this poor kid who was beautiful and brilliant and all this that ended up with him committing suicide.
Yeah.
Well, that's just one story.
Yes, and many more are documented in your book, which is titled The Son I Knew Too Late. And I'm so happy that you provide, thanks so much for sharing that, first of all. In your book, you provide even more of these kind of stories, and your book also provides this guide to help us to survive and to thrive. But before we go into that, I just feel like knowing what was this last, him making that choice of taking his life.
Okay, that was the last thing. Here you had this superstar who had never gotten a B. He's out, he graduates at 20 years old, and he has his bachelor's and master's in theoretical math. And he gets this job in a corporation in Silicon Valley, which is the high-tech area of California.
Yes.
And he's in this corporation that is trying to vie with people like Apple and that kind of thing, when they're really back in the day when it was just new. And they had an opening for the point man on their development team, because they wanted to move this company into the 21st century and be a real competitor against people like Apple and etc. And they hired John at 21 and a half to be that point man, creating the next up level of their company and make them competitive with the likes of Apple. And my son was all for it. He was excited about it, and he loved his boss. And what happened is that he didn't know. I had to find this out years later by Googling that company. But what happened from his point of view is his boss came in one day on Good Friday and said, we need to move you to a different part of the plant. And so he was walking John down to this new part of the plant, and John said, what have I done wrong? And the man said, nothing. You've done nothing wrong, but you just need to be here now. You've just going to you'll like it. It's going to be really great. And so he gets to this new part of the plant, and he's in shock. And he keeps asking the man, what have I done wrong? And the man kept saying, nothing. You did fine. This is going to be great for you. You're going to love it. I'll get the paperwork and I'll have you sign it and I'll be back. And my son didn't believe he had done nothing wrong. He felt that he had somehow failed, and he panicked. And after all of it the move had been implemented, he had to go back to his office, and he just sat in his office after hours just thinking, and he was in a suicidal crisis. He was like, I have failed. I failed. And he'd never experienced to be. This was like failure. And he tried calling a couple of people and to no avail. And so he just wasn't trying to kill himself. He wanted help, but he wasn't getting it. But he was in a crisis. He was in a true crisis. And that's when he went out and he got in his car and he just ran it into a concrete wall as hard as he could. And that was the end. And I had to find out years later. I finally thought, I wonder what happened to that company. And I Googled, and it turned out that IBM was buying it out. They couldn't report it out yet. It was still in process. And so he was being moved to save him from having his job cut. His job would have gone away because they wouldn't have needed a point man on their development team if they were going to be part of IBM. So they were moving him to somewhere that would survive the buyout because they felt that he was so valuable, but he took it as failure and killed himself over it.
Oh, that's sad. That's painful.
Yeah. But how many people do that? I mean, how many people, go into a crisis thinking the worst and end up acting out and missing out on the truth, which is, if you had waited, you would have learned something that very, very important that would change everything. And John would never have been anything but a success in anything he tried. He had proven that. And so wherever he was, he would have risen. He couldn't help it.
Yeah.
But he took that moment and he was panicked and he had no other input, and he just ended up getting in his car, finishing his life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's sad. I'm so sorry about that. Yeah.
Well, it happens to a lot of other people, and that's why I want people to know what happened, because they need to know that his story was just beginning, and no matter what happened, he could have overcome and surpassed everything and been incredible wherever he was. But he took it personally. And thought it was something about him, and it wasn't.
Yeah. That's true.
And how many people take things personally and think it's them when it isn't?
A lot. So, Sally, what kind of systems or what kind of structure can society or schools put into place to prevent suicide, for example?
Oh, my favorite topic. Well, after he died, I have had a chance to really look at all of the different things that we as a society are also missing with respect to our children and letting them down. And because I had to find out all these things the hard way. And one of the things I, as a psychotherapist, have noticed is that Americans do not teach in the schools any social emotional skills. They don't teach you how to get along with other kids. They don't teach you how to get along with your own emotions. They don't teach you how to speak critically to someone in a way that isn't toxic or difficult to receive. We don't know how to get along with our own selves, and we don't know how to get along with other people. And this is something that has to be taught. It's not innate. But schools focus on IQ, which is an intellectual quotient stuff, reading, writing, arithmetic. But in America, nobody's teaching kids how to get along with each other. And that is a surefire way to create a society that is imbalanced. Because we have noticed that research has proven that the highest probability of success and happiness in life is tied to our emotional skills, our social emotional intelligence. But if we don't teach to it, we're setting up kids for disaster. And so since my son's death, after I finally did get my licensure, what I've been doing every single year for free, because it's a passion, is I am invited into classes in high schools, and I teach juniors in high school emotional intelligence skills. I teach them how to regulate their own emotions. I teach them how to recognize the emotions of nonverbal behavior in their classmates and in themselves, and how to use it for information and effect. I teach them how to speak critically in a way that people will say, thank you. I didn't know that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. There's so many things, and learning how to listen, really listen. That's key to learning. But if you don't know how to listen, you could get scattered, you can get ADHD, you can get all these different problems, but because you haven't learned to listen. And so that's what I teach in schools. And I tell you, every year, it's just the most brilliant thing, because I'll walk in and I'll see all these kids with dead eyes, just bored out of their tree, don't want to listen, or talking to each other. And 8 weeks later, you can't believe the light in their eyes, and they are on fire, and they are excited, and they're happy, they're connected to each other. They are just absolutely thrilled with what they're learning and finding out about each other and about themselves. And they're learning how to be powerful, and they're learning how to make a difference, and how to say things in powerful ways, and to overcome their fears, do difficult things, and find out they can all win. It's just the most fantastic thing I've ever done. And I do it every year. I've done it for over 20 years now. And
Wow.
I'm addicted to it because it's what every kid needs.
Yeah.
And also the other thing that is wrong is that our schools teach on the curve. It's an artificial way to separate kids from one another and make them compete with each other instead. It doesn't give kids a level playing field, and it doesn't give them the support they need to succeed. It gives a few people like my son the ability to outshine everybody. But you know what that causes? That causes 95% of the other kids to be really angry at him, because he's raising the curve, and he's going to stand out, and he's going to get the good job, and they'll be lucky to get a job at McDonald's. So that just creates alienation. It creates resentment, or kids give up. They go into addictions, they go suicidal, or else they go and get an AR because they don't find that there's any hope for them. And that's the vast majority are being left out. There's another way to teach. It's called criterion reference testing, and it pits you against yourself. You're not in competition with other kids. Each kid is just got their own personal experience and how they've performed before, and that's how they either grow and become. And that way, none of the kids feel any competition with each other. They all are connected. Everybody's happy. They get along, and it's a completely different world. And everyone can get an A if they do the work. Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we giving everyone a chance to rise at their own pace and become who they really are, instead of pitting them against one another in a way that creates alienation, hopelessness, despair, anger? It's being programmed in school.
And that has to change. We have to do what we can, like what you're also doing also, to make those changes happen. And I'm so glad that you are taking that step the little way you can with your book also to, create awareness about this. But before I let you go, Sally, because the time is almost up for this episode, if I let you go, I would just love to know one thing from you. With everything that you've experienced, everything that you've gone through, grieving your son, walking through that process, going deeper into knowing what happened to him, and how that influenced and make the choices that he made at the end of the day. I'll just like you to reflect back and let us know how we could live a life that is worth living. Like, are there like some tips from your life journey so far that you could share with us to help us keep a life worth living?
Okay. Actually, this is so important. And there's a metaphor. Do I have a minute or two to be able to say this?
Yes, please.
Okay, years and years ago, a boyfriend and I were in Lanai it's one of the Hawaiian islands, and we were walking around this bluff, and there was this really beautiful little cove, and it was down below us about 50 or 100 feet, but it was this perfect little cove, and we were like, oh my gosh, we've got to go and snorkel in there. It's just too beautiful. And there was coral and all these things, and we jumped down, and we found a way down, and we got in the water, and we were snorkeling around the coral and all the little fishes, and everything was beautiful, and we were going further and further out. And as we got way out there, we'd been out about an hour, all of a sudden we looked back at shore, and suddenly there had been the waves were huge. They had become really huge, and they were crashing on the coral, and it was all right. And between us and land was really a scary view of how we could be just dashed onto coral and cut to pieces and never survive. And I was like, wow, the waves had come up so fast. And my boyfriend he just waved to me saying, basically, follow me. And as we kind of went over the top of a wave, as it started to crash down, he just dove down and found a piece of white sand between the corals. And he just dug in like he was an anchor. He just dug into the sand like an anchor. And so when the water sucked back at the low end, we stayed where we were, safe in the white sand. And when the next wave came, we rose with it and went over the next batch of coral. And as the wave dropped into the coral, he would go down and find some more white sand and would dig in and let that wave go back again. And when it came back, would rise up again and go. When we got to shore, we were safe. Everything was fine. And it was a metaphor. We are always riding the wave of life. Every wave goes up. Every wave crashes down. And at the bottom of every wave, it's already beginning to rise again. But when you're in the bottom of a wave, the last thing you do is anything. You go and find a safe place and you hold and let the wave roll, knowing it's never going to last forever and you're going to have another opportunity to rise again and surf the next wave and get to safety and then go down and hold if it's difficult. The more difficult it is, the harder it is, the more important it is that you just hold and do nothing. You do not act. Because whatever you do then will be a desperate, over-the-top reaction to how it is. Just hold and stay safe. And that way you'll get to new shores and a new life and safety and everything. And so it's so important that you understand just understand it's a wave. Every darkness is followed by light. Every negative has a positive. That's how we have meaning in this world. It's okay. But when it's dark and it's hard and it's painful, just find a safe place and dig in and do nothing but hold. It will pass and you can rise again.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Just dig in, hold, it will pass. Wow, Sally, I've learned so much from you. I know there are a lot of people out there who maybe have some more questions to ask and are looking for ways or means to connect with you. So what's the best way to connect with you and work with you?
Well, you could go to my website, which is Sally A. Raymond. There's a place where you can actually access me, or you can call me or email me at S as in Sam, B as in boy, SAL as in Sally at cox. And I'm happy to work with anybody. I love working with people. I've had so many incredible experiences, and yet my son is my teacher.
Thank you so much, Sally. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much for taking up this mission to help the world to become a better place. Thank you. I really appreciate this.
Okay, thank you so much. I so appreciated this, and you're fabulous, Toby. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
I'll adopt.
Yeah,
You're adopted.
I'm adopted. Yeah, nice. I have a second mother. Yeah. I'll tell my mom that I just found a new mom.
Thank you very much.